Once you were old enough, what were the dark family secrets you were finally let in on? By Ask Reddit.
Not very much a secret, but took me until I was older to understand what was happening. My mom would sometimes have us play a game called Army, which consisted of me, my mom, and my siblings army crawling around our apartment. Kind of a hide-and-seek style game. She would yell, "Hit the deck," randomly, and we would all drop and find a hiding spot. We would giggle and giggle while my mom army crawled around looking for us. We loved the game so much. I realized a few years ago while retelling the story that we lived in a really terrible neighborhood, and she would yell it out when she heard gunshots outside the building. I'm assuming she was worried about stray bullets. Edit, I shared everyone's amazing comments with my mom, and she shed a tear. She feels very appreciated on International Women's Day today.
Your mom is AFing G.
War vet, single mum of 3, worked her way up in life from bartending to union plumber foreman to owning her own gunsmithing shop with my stepdad. She's a strong woman.
Pretty effing smart way to teach kids how to duck and cover without scaring the hell out of them.
My father met my mother in the Philippines when he was stationed there in the Navy. He married her there and conceived me. He went away to finish his tour of duty. My mother moved to America when she was a month away from giving birth to me. She moved in with relatives in Texas. My father's tour ended while he was in Hawaii. He met a woman there and called my mom in America, asking for a divorce. He wanted to take back his recent marriage to her, with a kid on the way, because he had a hot one-night stand. My mother was already scared, being in a new country, not knowing much English. Add to this that she was pregnant, about to give birth, and her husband was dumping her. My Texan uncle got on a plane to Hawaii, prepared to kick my father's ass. He somehow talked my father into being a man and taking responsibility for his wife and child. The fact that the fling dumped his ass surely helped. He was back by the time I was born. I learned all this when I was 11, around the time my parents got divorced. It was only the first of countless dark family secrets I would come to learn during my teenage years.
This might be the first story I read here where the uncle is the good guy in the teller's point of view.
My grandfather got out of serving in Vietnam by robbing pharmacies and going to jail for years.
Wow. Mine got out of it by telling the Navy that he could type, so he remained stateside and typed reports or something for his unit. He said he was one hell of a two-fingered typist.
When I was about 10, my cousin and his dad died. I always thought it was an accident and on the same day. When I was old enough, I was told that his dad actually committed suicide and my cousin followed him couple months later. Truly devastated me, although I didn't know them well. Edit, thank you for the warm words and also for sharing your similar stories with me. I've read all the replies. My grief is still there because I understand that with professional help both would maybe still be here today. It just wasn't common to seek help back then. I hope all of you are well.
I'm so sorry. I know of a similar story. When I was a senior in high school, 2006-2007, one of my classmates lost her dad to suicide over winter break. Poor girl was so close to him, and it took her a couple of months to feel mentally okay enough to come back to school. She had just gotten back into a regular school routine when one day, she was pulled out of class. Her older brother had committed suicide. That was it for her, and she finished her schoolwork at home for the rest of the year. Obviously it was beyond devastating for her, her older sister, and their mother. And it broke our hearts that while the rest of us were doing prom, prepping for graduation and college, etc., she was at home wrestling with deep grief. From what I can tell on Facebook, they are all doing well today, but man, I can't imagine what it was like to be the people most directly affected by that situation.
That my cousin was actually my half-brother. Mom got pregnant in college and my aunt and uncle adopted him. And that my dad wasn't my biological father. Mom and dad got divorced, she got pregnant by another man, and my dad wasn't able to have kids of his own, so they got remarried and he raised me as his own.
There are 2 posts here about a cousin that is also a half-brother.
And if you put the 2 together, what do you get? A full brother.
My uncle is believed to have murdered 2 Australian police officers in the late 80s.
Holy poo, Walsh Street?
Yep. Peter McAvoy.
I met Peter at an RSL club I worked at in Newcastle and had quite a few interactions with him. He was playing the pokies the first time I met him, and I saw his surname on his member's card when I went over for a payout and said I had friends that were McAvoys and maybe he was related, and he said he was estranged from his family because he was accused of doing something very bad that he didn't do. I was like, oh, I'm okay. Then I googled him.
This is nuts. I've never met him and don't think I ever will.
This isn't two Redditors finding each other online you normally see on Two Redditors One Cup, but it sure as hell deserves to be on there.
When I was young I thought it was really nice that my Nana lived with my aunt and her family since she was getting on a bit and it meant she was looked after and there were always people around. Aunt has 6 kids. Occasionally Aunt would gripe about being the one looking after Nana since Aunt is also one of many kids, and being young I sympathized, but given they all spent loads of time with Nana too, didn't think it was a big deal. You don't think about financial responsibility when you're young, I think, just social and caring. Well, it turns out the reason Nana lives with Aunt is because Aunt and her husband convinced Nana to put the house in their name so they could look after her affairs, and sold it out from under her and invested the money in a pyramid scheme, so it's gone now. Because of this her siblings refuse to give Aunt a penny towards looking after Nana since it's her fault Nana has no money or assets, and instead pay to take Nana out all the time, meals, shopping, activities, so she doesn't go without, but they let Aunt struggle under the weight of Nana's general living expenses. Aunt's kids are all independent now, so they are not going to be impacted by money problems. Now I look back at her griping with annoyance and think what a terrible person she is.
My aunt and cousin did something similar to my Nan. Nan passed with virtually nothing to her name, because my cousin had been made her next of kin and controlled the bank account, while allegedly receiving a carer's allowance for my aunt. An aunt and the cousin that was complicit, the other 2 cousins have nothing to do with them, wound up moving to another state because they'd amassed one too many debts. They ripped my folks and I off. It was easy for me to cut them out of my life, but leaving their own mother and grandmother with nothing was beyond the pale. I'm glad your aunt's siblings do the right thing by your Nana.
I'm sorry to hear that. It's awful what some people can do to their own family, especially the vulnerable members. It was surreal as a kid. She would have a moan and no one would react. It was like she hadn't spoken. I thought they were judging her for complaining, or maybe felt guilty but didn't want to help her. Turns out they had decided not to keep conflicting with her over it for Nana's sake, as it upset her if they argued over it since it's done now, and instead stonewalled anything she mentioned that was about or as a result of her actions. I guess part of that was not mentioning it to the next generation. I found out from someone who married in and then divorced back out of the family, who I'm on very good terms with, and even then only because I asked what they thought of the weird situation.
Not so much let in on, as we found out by accident, but apparently my dad's first love and him got into a serious car crash when he was 25 and she died. He lived with her father for years after her death. He still occasionally comes to visit my dad, even 30 years later. We were always told he was a mentor until my sister pressed my mum on the subject. One of my sisters is even named after the girl that died, middle name, and we never even knew about her until last year. None of us have ever brought it up with him.
My friend was engaged to his first love in their early 20s when she passed from cancer. 10 years later, he got married to an amazing woman who honored his late fiancée in their wedding ceremony. Not a dry eye in the place.
Oh man, that's awesome and heartbreaking all in one.
The woman he married is a good human. I hope they have a long and awesome marriage.
My grandma retired and she still decided to work for her brother in his restaurant to save up money for when she dies. Funerals are, obviously, expensive. She insisted he would hold on to her paychecks and pay for her funeral when she dies. He never did.
What a effing asshole, sad face. How did the funeral end up being paid for?
I think another family member paid for it. And the spot on a cemetery has to be paid for after the first 10Y for another decade. My mom was trying to sue her uncle to pay for it. But they only had a verbal agreement about the funeral, so it wasn't successful.
My dad did a whole load of work for a family member who said that he'd use some of the money he'd have paid my dad to buy the headstone. He didn't. My dad's headstone was repossessed.
Headstone repossession is a new low. I am sorry to even know such a thing can happen.
I think this is the pootiest one, to actually exploit your elderly sister that way. I don't know why, but this is the worst, but it's horrible to me.
Because it's callous and a decision purely based on greed. It pushes aside what should have been decades of familial love for, what, $10 to $20 K. That's it, the price of a new car. It's low, shameful, and slimy. To me this is the worst story on here. My heart sinks and I mourn for that man's parents when I read about this, and hope they never got a chance to hear about how their son acted towards his sister.
The reason I had a live-in babysitter when I was 5 that moved in at 2 a.m. was because my mum's cousin killed 2 kids and we ended up harboring his daughter during the trial. He's the only person on death row in my county.
What happened to her after?
My brother swears she stole my mom's jewelry and ran off. Mom says she didn't. But I'm pretty sure she's in town with kids of her own.
Your mom's cousin wasn't bona fide, that's for sure.
My step-grandfather has always been an alcoholic. As a child he even taught me how to mix his favorite drink. As kid at like 6 years old I would mix his drink as he liked and bring it into him in the living room. Don't ask what the drink was a mix of cause I literally can't remember, and my grandpa always acted funny. I always liked spending time with him cause I found him funny. So I never saw the bad side of his alcoholism and he never made me drink or anything, so overall he didn't have any negative impact on me at all. But before I was born he could get so drunk he threatened to kill my grandma, and when he got in a car accident and came home he was bleeding badly from his head and he started saying my granny shot him. He even threw out some of the wedding pictures my parents had. I never knew how horrible he was. Maybe cause he liked kids or something. He would make me cocoa and watch Garfield with me when I was a kid. He was never a bad influence in my life. So it was so weird to me when I found out these things about him. Before he died though, he really regretted drinking, and he completely stopped. He became really depressed too until his granddaughter, biological, was born. He was so happy about his granddaughter. He died regretting everything and a sober man who was happy to have been able to meet his one and only biological granddaughter. Regardless of everything he really changed in the end and everyone was really upset he died.
Most my mom's family were raging drunks. She was a very late oopsie baby, so almost all her siblings were grown once she came around, and she spent a lot of time bouncing between siblings, parents, or other relatives. Her older brothers got her drunk at age 5 and laughed while she puked all over herself. She learned to drive around 10 because her brother would get too poo-faced and she'd have to drive him home. And there was also pretty severe medical neglect. She's never gotten therapy and was a real treat to be raised by. Intergenerational trauma, the gift that keeps on giving.
Break that cycle, friend.
I'm doing my best to do just that. I've made mistakes with my son, but we have a much healthier relationship than I ever did with my parents. Which has been possible because, unlike her, I actually get treatment for my mental illnesses and put in the work to heal from my trauma and do better.
Somewhat similar situation to you. Whenever I hear stories of my step-grandpa, it's like hearing a story about a completely different person. My extremely patient, mild-mannered, and kind step-grandpa apparently used to be a drunk when my stepdad was growing up, and I don't think he even became the man he is today until my stepdad was in his late 20s. It's sad and baffling on the rare occasion when my stepdad will tell a story about him.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.